So we're sitting here with Sarah Jenkins, and I asked Sarah to specifically speak to our board because I know you guys are awesome and we've come so far, but I'm sure you have so many questions that I don't always feel that I have the right answers. And so I thought I'd ask you a few of them.
Sure.
Because you're here.
No, I'm happy
and
to do
I'm
that
here.
for you. Yeah.
And therefore,
Sure, I'm happy to do
we'll
that
just
for you.
go for it.
Okay. No.
So I guess the first thing I like to ask you is, we've made up this number, but how many of us have been trained in equine-assisted EMDR in the world?
Wow, that's a really good question. Off the top of my head, I would say probably less than 35.
Wow.
And and here's why. Okay. Anybody that knows me, including you, will say I'm a stickler for doing EMDR really, really consciously, and I'm a stickler for doing equine and integrating that with EMDR really, really consciously. It's a big investment in time. It's a financial commitment, and it's a real investment in making sure that we're doing really quality therapy for trauma survivors. And so it's probably less than 35 folks. And the way that I run the trainings, we just had one here, is I run them very intimately and with the opportunity for people to really understand complex trauma, especially. And to do that, I run them as very small programs. And I really like that. I'm okay with that. I don't want to have a large amount of people trained because it's important to have people who understand trauma. It's one thing to do equine-assisted work. It's one thing to do EMDR. But you've got to understand and be really aware of how to work with trauma. And so it really requires people to walk in the door with that knowledge.
Awesome, thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
And I'm most familiar, I know there's EAPs, but I'm most familiar with EGALA.
Sure,
Can you just talk a little bit about the differences between equine-assisted EMDR and the EGALA model, or EAP, whatever you're comfortable with?
I kind of joke like EAP, EFP, EIEIO. There's lots of us out there. So let's talk about a commonality first. So a commonality is we all see the value of the horse. We all understand that when we put folks in an arena or in an environment with the horse, that something changes. And so we all recognize the beauty of that. So that's a true commonality. That being said, here's my bias. I'm a trauma and dissociation specialist first before I was an EMDR therapist. I was a horsewoman, I was a horse girl before I ever was a trauma dissociation specialist and an EMDR specialist. So those things integrated for me are very important. So what's different in other ways of doing equine assisted work, and this model is this. My bias is that if we're doing trauma treatment, and when I say trauma treatment, we're really working to heal trauma, to treat PTSD, because PTSD is completely healable. It doesn't only have to be dealt with, it can be healed. EMDR and equine together can do that. EMDR can. It's important that we as therapists, first of all, are working within our clinical scope of practice. So I have to really understand that doing trauma work is a phased approach. So there's, without going too far into detail, there's different phases, and that's not just EMDR. In doing trauma work overall, I have to have a ton of things in place, a lot of preparation in place before ever getting into that charged stuff. Because what we can do is we can blow clients out of what we call the window of tolerance, and we can actually decrease their quality of life. We can increase what we call dissociation. We can get them in more post-traumatic decline, and we can cause harm. So what happens is some equine experiences is that we put clients in the arena or in an experience with a horse and we see what happens. And a lot of stuff comes up. There's a richness, of course. But then you have clients that if they don't have calm skills first, if they haven't treated their dissociation first, all of a sudden, all that richness of the stuff, the trauma is coming up out with the horses. And then they're left with it.
No tools.
There's not a tool in terms of how to bring it back down. So trauma treatment, and I'm sorry, this is my soapbox, has to be, it is contraindicated to not use sound phased approaches to doing trauma work. And so EMDR is an example of a way you can do phased trauma work. There are other ways too. but it has to be phased treatment. Otherwise, we are not working within a clinical scope of practice. So the reason that equine-assisted EMDR is valuable, from my perspective, is that you are working with a tried and true researched model for working with trauma. And because, just like lots of EAP folks, including EGAL and all sorts of other folks, know the power of the horse at the same time, you bring that experience in as a way to really help the client system know that the danger is over, and you integrate that with a phased approach to trauma treatment. That means that you are in alignment with what is clinically and ethically, from my perspective, in line. You know, if I'm in a moment where I have to justify, why did I do that with that client in that moment? Why did I make that decision with that horse? I can tell you. Because I know that client's dissociated, or I know that client doesn't have calm, or I'm fully aware of the fact that we need a lot more preparation skills. Or I can tell that that client doesn't think it's a memory they're in reliving. So clients, when they're doing EAP work that isn't in a phased approach, can go to reliving, and it can make it worse. And as an organization, or if we're in a private practice or whatever setting, this goes back to kind of why do we use horses. That phased approach, coupled with the horse, helps the clients be able to do the work and be more mindful in the moment that the danger is over. So that's kind of a long answer.
Yeah, and my thought is, and again I have to say EGALA because that's the only one I'm familiar with,
of course.
that we could utilize an EGALA if we just did the preparation.
Beautiful example. Yeah, that's a great example. So one of the really great things is the fact that, and in EGALA, they do this, right? You create opportunities for learning and growth. That's really what it's about. So from an EMDR perspective, that's not okay. Let's do that. But know that we're staying in that place. We're staying in that place. So can I teach this client, we did a ton of this at the training we were at this weekend, right? Can I teach the client to really have a tolerance for calm before I start, bing, let's go into the reliving of the old stuff. So yeah, you can do an EGALA-based activity in that language, and that would be fine. But have a very conscious decision about, we're not going to that stuff. Now, here's the thing, right? Then folks will say, but you can't help but going into the stuff because horses bring up everything. Well, I can't help but going into that material because when the horses come into the experience, stuff comes up. That is right. So I would agree with that. But we have a responsibility as therapists and equine specialists to dial it back. Classic horsemanship phrase, right? Slow and right beats fast and wrong. It's the same thing with doing trauma work. So, yeah, do those EGALA-based experiences. Give them senses of mastery, confidence, boundary setting, whatever kind of things you want to teach them. But when it goes into the stuff that's unhealed, do your front-loading with some of the EGALA work. Do your processing in an integration of the equine-assisted EMDR.
Great, thank you. That's kind of what I thought, but I just wanted to get it.
No, I'm happy to answer those questions for you and for your board, of course.
And then one of the things that our board asks, and again, I don't feel that I have that knowledge, is the importance of the equine specialist. And I know Heather is, is Satan, and definitely my partner. But to explain that, I have difficulty because I don't have the horse experience.
Sure. And so what I can tell you is that the equine specialist, when you're doing trauma work, if I'm in office, and you probably have this experience, is that when we're in office, there's a lot that we're holding in terms of space, because there's all this material, and we're trying to really look for dissociation when those clients check out or when they're not able to be present, and when the old stuff, they get into what we call hyper arousal or hypo, and we have to constantly track that. And if we're not, then that's not helpful for the client at all. So the horse helps the client stay present. We talked about that a few minutes ago. But what happens when we have an equine specialist is it gives us the ability to not only ensure increased safety, but really ensure that the therapist is seeing the big picture in terms of, is the client present? is the horse mirroring behavior that can help the client to stay present?
Right, because my focus is on the client.
You have to focus on.
I have to watch that client.
Yeah,
Right.
You
okay.
do have. You have
do.
to. And I'm not saying that you're not looking at the horse.
Right.
It's not like it's that segmented. And eventually, what happens with the art of this, and it does become an art, is I begin to see, and I believe you guys are a perfect example of this, is that your equine specialist and your EMDR therapist really start to create a synergy about them. And I'll tell you what you're teaching your client. You're teaching your client about relationships.
I was just going to say it's relationships.
Yeah, you are teaching the client, I can see that humans can have a positive relationship and I can process my trauma and that can be supported by the horse. It creates a sense of community. And I'll tell you, for the folks that you work with, a sense of community is often missing, is missed if it was there, and there's a sense of isolation.
But the military is community.
There is
so
community.
we actually replicate that
Yes.
by the
Yes.
horse, the equine specialist, and the
Yes.
therapist.
Yes, exactly, because you're creating a microcosm for them in that moment. And I've seen in sessions, it happened this weekend, where there were moments when the client needed something from the horse in order to help move some really challenging material, and asked the ES to help.
Right.
And the EMDR therapist stood down because that client needed the ES not to have that mental health perspective. I just need the horse right now.
Yeah.
And can you help me have that horse experience right now? I was able to reach out and go, I need help, and ask the ES.
Our co-therapist.
Yeah, our co-therapist.
That's nonverbal.
Yeah, it's totally nonverbal.
Help.
And so because of that, the equine specialist took a therapeutic role. And also what I find, to be honest with you, we therapists, no disrespect to you or to me, but we can be a real heavy bunch. You know, we want to get in there, we want to process this stuff, and of course with the EMDR we learn complex trauma, you need to back out. So our ESs don't have from our clients a lot of baggage associated with, I know what therapists are like, and with our most challenging traumas, many folks have been through a series of therapists.
Right.
So not
They have
only
been.
does the horse have kind of a neutral territory, so does your ES. So the fact that your ES is not a therapist can be beneficial because maybe I feel a little less on guard because you're not a therapist, because I've been over-therapized.
Yeah, well, they happen.
And that's the same kind of thing that the horse
Great.
gives them too. So that's
Thank
my
you.
perspective.
Thank you very much.
You're
Appreciate
welcome.
it. Great.
Yeah. Anything else I can answer for you?
I don't think so.
Okay.